Good morning and welcome back to the lecture series on refugee migration diaspora. So today we are going to start our discussion on a new text and see how displacement has been understood against the backdrop of the partition of India in Bapsi Sidhwa's novel Cracking India. So, Cracking India very poignantly and very elaborately engages with the topic of partition. It shows the emigration of the Hindu families, the Hindu and the Sikh families from Lahore, burning Lahore against the backdrop of partition. And this entire horrendous picture is captured through the eye of a Parsi child. So, we will discuss today Bapsi Sidhwa's novel Cracking India. So, Bapsi Sidhwa is a Pakistani novelist of Parsi descent who writes in English, and she is a resident in the United States. So, Sidhwa is an American of Pakistani origin. Her 1991 novel Ice Candy Man, which is also known as Cracking India, served as the basis for Deepa Mehta's 1998 film Earth. So, Cracking India, which has been adapted into the film titled Earth, is our topic for today. Cracking India is a 1991 partition novel written by Bapsi Sidhwa, and it was originally published as Ice Candy Man. This novel by Bapsi Sidhwa is narrated from the perspective of Leni Sethi, who happens to be a child protagonist in the novel, a 4-year-old Parsi girl who lives in the Punjabi city of Lahore, and she is 5 at the beginning of the novel and she turns 10 at the novel's close. So, it's the entire novel spans 5 years in Leni's life. Leni's, it's a coming of age narrative which shows Leni getting mature through learning the adult ways of life between the span of 5 and 10 years of age. So, Leni recounts her childhood memories after she is struck by polio in her infancy. She spends most of her time with her Aya Shanta, an 18-year-old Hindu girl from Amritsar. She learns a lot about adult relationships. Like I said, the story spans 5 years of Leni's life between the age of 5 and 10. And so, we see the rites of passage, we see how she is getting more mature, she is learning the adult ways of life. She is spending most of her time with Shantabai, who is an 18-year-old Hindu girl from Amritsar who happens to be her nanny. Leni learns a lot about adult relationships from staying closely with this voluptuous nanny as well as her diverse group of admirers. With the rising political tensions that give way to mob riots, fires, and violent murders, we see that Leni's narrative about her family drastically shifts its focus to her observations of a burning Lahore, a Lahore amid incendiary, and we see that gradually as the narrative proceeds, Lahore is consumed by violence. So, Leni has a polio-stricken leg. She is unable to walk properly and she is forced to undergo multiple surgeries in which her foot is broken and recast into a functional position. So, through a number of operations, Leni's right leg and foot are recast into the landscape of her body as pathetically thin, wrinkled, gratifyingly abnormal and far from banal. Leni fears that the surgeries will completely reshape her foot, get it back to normal, and therefore, in a way, transform her otherwise unique identity. So, a lot of scholars that have read Cracking India, that have, critically analyzed this novel, argue that Leni's broken body allegorically embodies the breaking of Pakistan from India. Basically, the dismembering of the Indian subcontinent is symbolized through Leni's broken body. And so, this leg tells the story of a broken nation. Through the broken leg, we allegorically understand the story of broken India, as well as the story of this new nation which is born out of the violent divide, the new nation called Pakistan. When the Second World War gets over, Leni describes how the elders of her generation are responsible for the destructive and war-ridden children of the current generation during the World War as well as during the partition. So she blames the adults for giving the children a very, pathetic childhood. She blames the elders of her generation for giving the children a childhood that is so painful, that is always stricken by fear, anxiety, and war tensions, something that no child deserves to see and know so early in their life. So she refers to how dominant the atmosphere of war pervades her childhood. To quote Leni, I realize I was born with an awareness of the war, and I recall the dim, faraway fear of bombs that tinged with bitterness my mother's milk. No wonder I was a colicky baby. Unquote. So, Leni, as a young narrator, helps the reader delve into the confused perspective of children during the partition. How encountering new things, getting to know things like man-woman relationship, partition, bodily violence, murder, incendiary, rape, all these things, when children get to know very early in their life, it shapes their life in a very different way. It shapes their psyche in a very different way. The concept of partition for Leni is merely digging a deep canal between the two countries. So, to begin with, Leni is very innocent when the story opens, and she hears from Shantabai, her nanny, that partition would mean digging a deep canal between the two countries, and that's how the two countries would be actually physically divided. So she says, I quote, "A new nation is born. India has been divided after all. Did they dig the long, long canal Aya mentioned?" Unquote. So that's a very innocent question. And from there on, we see that new things dawn on her. She realizes that it's not only about this digging a canal, but it's, spewing hatred among the different communities, Hindu, Muslims, Sikhs, actually spewing hatred. They are actually displaying their hatred through this partition. So, Cracking India is on the BBC News list of the 100 most influential novels. In the United States, the New York Times named the novel as one of its notable books of the year. Cracking India also earned Bapsi Sidhwa Germany's prestigious literary award, which is known as the Literaturpreis. So, this prestigious literary award bestowed on Cracking India by Germany, it's titled Literaturpreis, makes the book all the more important in terms of its interventions vis-a-vis the great watershed of Indian subcontinent's partition. So, Indo-Canadian filmmaker Deepa Mehta directed a film based on Cracking India. It came out in 1998 and it's entitled Earth. Leni describes her family and the colorful group of suitors from various religious backgrounds who gather around her attractive Aya Shantabai. So Shanta has many suitors. They really fall in love with this attractive woman. And Aya's flock of friends, which comprise people coming from all faiths and all backgrounds and religions from undivided India, resonates a sense of communal harmony. So, towards the beginning of the narrative, we see that all these friends who are actually from different backgrounds, different faiths and religions commune together around Aya. It shows harmony, intercommunal harmony. As India moves closer to being split, being dismembered, tensions appear both in this friends group and in Indian society as a part of the macrocosmic happenings. So, we have this tension reflecting in the microcosm in Aya's friend group, as well as resonating at the macrocosmic level in Indian society at large. Leni's life and community provide a window onto this violence that occurs before, during, and even after the partition. Leni and her Parsi family, however, are considered to be relatively safer from the violence, which is largely initiated by and directed towards three communities, the Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs. So, Parsis in a way are safer and more invisible. They are a little insignificant. In this regard, when Leni is trying to gauge the Parsi communities, her own communities belonging or position vis-a-vis this partition, the partition riots, the partition tensions, her parents explain to her that they are like a chameleon, Her mother tells that the Parsis are like chameleon, and they camouflage in the environment where they exist. That is kind of a survival skill that Parsis in India have acquired over ages. And she also tells the story of the Parsis coming to India during the Mughal rule, and since then the Parsis have only sweetened the population around them without distinctly becoming visible. They are just like sugar dissolved in milk. So, they sweeten the population further without separately showing their entity or their visibility. So, that is basically the position of the Parsis. Now, the coincidence of Leni's 8th birthday and the creation of the new nation of Pakistan in one narrative moment. In one go, we see that Leni is celebrating her 8th birthday, and then Pakistan is born. It inscribes a particular juncture in history at which Leni's narrative begins to consider what it even means to have survived this entire, this entire bloody chapter of partition. As a kid, her birthday is special for her. However, we see that the adults, the elders are too traumatized by the ongoings of partition to make her even feel special. So, what happens? The children born immediately before the partition, the years, leading up to the partition, see a chunk of their childhood lost during all these tensions and riots. So, Bapsi Sidhwa's Cracking India centers around the coming of age of this young protagonist, Leni. So, as a feminist post-colonial border narrative, the novel's portrayal of the harrowing violence of India's partition has been the primary source of its literary reputation and its critical resonance. The extent to which the novel focuses on Leni's pre-adolescent experience and emotions allows the mundane element of her adolescent trauma to become representative of the national trauma of India's partition. So, Leni's trauma at the microcosmic level resonates with the national trauma, what the nation or the subcontinent is undergoing during the partition. Partition is an instant in which sectarian violence between men has been enacted on women's bodies in sexualized or rapacious acts, through outrageous acts. Rosemary George points out that despite the general consensus that partition was an exceptional moment of insanity in which men went mad, it still remains that the violence that women underwent at that time is very similar to, only different in magnitude, compared to what women usually face, what is usually doled out to a woman in a patriarchal society. And this is something partition scholar like Gyanendra Pandey also says. The fact that partition, no one owned partition later on, no community, because what happened, the degree of animosity that people saw happening during the partition is not allowed by any community's value. No community's value allows one to go on a rampage, killing, plundering and looting and raping, right? So, all communities disowned this watershed. However, later critics like Gyanendra Pandey argue that this violence had been there all along, at an intrinsic level, at a more dormant level, through our language that we use for another community, the myths that we refer to while describing the other community, and the violence towards women is only a more blown up form during the partition. So, the proportion of violence increased. However, one cannot say that the society was completely violence free, or that the patriarchal society never harbored such misogynist values. They had always been there. Only the proportion, the magnitude became enormous, unimaginable during the partition, and went completely out of control. Now, critic like Ananya Jahan Ara Kabir likewise maintains that the events of partition were primarily inscribed on the bodies of women. Women's bodies became receptacle of violence because they provided a space over which the competitive games of men were played out. Kavita Daya describes the ways in which partition impacted male and female sexuality differently, representing women's bodies as others, so representing the otherness of women's bodies prior to the violence, right? While Leni's growth is crucially influenced by the events of partition, which constitute the backdrop to her coming of age, it almost, runs parallelly. The partition events go parallelly with her rites of passage, and yet it predominantly occurs as a result of the sexual knowledge that she develops through her interaction with the women around. So, we see that even as partition is precipitating, even as partition is transpiring, Leni is maturing by that time. She learns about different things, about the adult ways of life, as she is in touch with the different women and men around her. She is a very intelligent and observant child, and that's how she is picking up very fast about things that don't make her feel as a child anymore. She is no longer thinking as a child. Once she realizes how bitter, for example, humans can be with each other, how hostile people can be with each other just because they come from different religious backgrounds. She learns about religion, she learns about man-woman relationship, and she is no longer that innocent. So, Leni's developmental trauma is explicitly gendered through its focus on female sexuality. In particular, we see that Leni's naive yet precociously sexual observations of women and men around her both expose and resist the violence that exists in their lives. For example, very early on in the filmic adaptation by Deepa Mehta, we see Leni is exposed to the concept of child marriage, the fact that she plays with the gardener's daughter, and the other day this daughter gets married to a man who is much older than her, almost her father, or even older than her father. So the child is married off to a much older man, and presumably he is a dwarf. So that kind of an odd pairing through an arranged marriage kind of surprises her, and she is starting to discover new things about society, about life, which are not really pleasurable, which do not really make her happy. The competing conservative national imaginaries that arise at the end of British rule in India intersect with the patriarchal power relations which circulate in Leni's household and community as well. So we have this very conservative national imaginaries that shapes the fundamental values of a post-colonial nation state, and the same kinds of values are reflected, are kind of echoed and circulated in Leni's household and community as well. So Leni's alternative female perspective is a digression, is a move away from the dominant interpretations of history, which is very male centric, obviously. So Leni's perspective is coming from a juvenile, a female, and a disabled person. So she, in a way, is displaced from the mainstream male centric historiography or history formation in terms of her interpretations and understandings of moments, and how she understands nation and nationalism. So, her understanding, the understanding by a disabled juvenile female, discloses the patriarchal and majoritarian underpinnings of the discourses, the ongoing discourses. What at first seems to be about a young girl's autobiographical experience during the time of the partition becomes, with the progression of the novel, a narrative about Leni's attempt to ascribe meaning to the partition, both as a historical event as well as a moment of trauma, a chapter of trauma. It is within this narrative shift that Leni's role as narrator is most poignantly complicated, because she is unable to fully experience and explore and define what she is witnessing in the course of the incidents that lead up to the partition. She is very naive. She's still too naive to define what partition as a trauma has brought to everyone, right? She's still discovering things. So whereas Leni's narrative is often characterized by innocent eyes, the eyes of the juvenile that lack a worldly experience, at the same time we see that her youthful first person narrative is interrupted by what seems as an older voice attempting to remember the time of the partition. So we have these two voices intermingling throughout the narrative. The child Leni, on the one hand, who had witnessed the partition trauma in the first place, and then the adult Leni, who writes all these incidents in hindsight, through retrospection, through in a retrospective tone. And so by the time this semi-autobiographical narrative is penned down by the adult Leni, she is able to process all those memories, and perhaps there is an adult understanding, an adult realization kind of intervening, adding values to what she had seen and felt many years back as a child. So we see that the adult Leni kind of puts her own commentary into the child Leni's perspectives. That kind of mishmash, that kind of interface between the child and the adult is happening constantly. So these moments of narrative interruption occur during the instances in which Leni attempts to tell about the violence that is tearing through Lahore streets and houses. These narrative interruptions, where the adult meets the child, corroborate that only through a failure of fiction, where fiction is fragmented, friction is cracked up, and friction becomes impossible. Only through such impossibility of fiction, failure of fiction, is the testimony to the trauma of the partition most poignantly and most meaningfully voiced. When we are talking about a trauma, when we are talking about a testimony or a child's witness of the partition, there is a failure of fiction, failure of language at one point where we cannot explain everything effectively. So, Aya's abduction and subsequent gang rape, apart from representing the fate of thousands of women during the events of the partition, is a specifically female traumatic experience that is deriving from male sexual aggression. The national trauma of partition and Leni's traumatic adolescent development are gendered within the novel. They're essentially a female's experience, and this experience heightens through the incident of Aya's rape. The entire feminine, agony, the female's, sensibility is symbolized, concentrated around Aya's rape, which forms the climactic part of the narrative. So, different kinds of violence coexisted during partition, and women's vulnerability differed according to their religions, their class, and their caste belonging. Critic Sangeeta Ray, in her influential reading, scrutinizes the novel's post-colonial gendered depiction of India, whereby Aya becomes the symbol of the torn nation, the nation falling apart. Ray maintains that the class differences between the novel's women reveals the elitist and bourgeois underpinnings of an Indian masculinist national discourse. So, at the larger scale, we have a masculinist national discourse being written by the freedom fighters, the protagonists of anti-colonial struggle, and against that discourse, against the background, there is an elitist bourgeois feminist discourse or kind of counter discourse that unfolds Leni's narrative. Leni is influenced by some very strong women in her family, in her neighborhood. We have a woman like the godmother who symbolized the strong women from that time. So, as Amreen Hai puts it, it is therefore possible to expand upon the notion of Aya as the sole representative figure of female violation in cracking India, and Aya's condition can be extended to understand the lives of the upper middle class women too. This novel is a slow transition to the massacre, the abysmal pit from which there is no respite. It starts off from a period when the partition murders were mostly a part of the rumors for the larger section of the society, till a situation transitions slowly towards, unraveling dead bodies everywhere. People, common people, the civilians start discovering dead bodies on roadside, and the rift between the religious communities become visibly more and more. It increases. Those who were friends initially get divided on the basis of their religious identity. There are increasing incidents of processions, riots, murders, rapes, and the gory truth of the partition gradually unfolds. It unfolds and reveals itself in the most ugly form. So, for example, in the story we see that when Sharbat Khan tells the Aya about the unknown dead bodies being found in different parts of the city, in different parts of Lahore, Aya inquires if they were the Hindu religion, if they were from the Hindu religion, and Sharbat Khan tells Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, one can tell they are from prosperous eating, drinking households. So, Aya's inquiry is an intentional interruption by the author to remind the readers that a dead body or even a human body has no religion. It is only when it exists in the cultural space that one is assigned a religion, a religious identity. No one is born with a religion, right? The predominance of gendered violence during the Indian partition was due to the fact that attacks on women were symbolic of attacking the honor and purity of the religion or country to which the women belonged. So, this symbolic interpretation of material bodily harm led to two forms of violence against women. The first form of violence, which was more prevalent, was inflicted on women by men from other religious community, a rival religious community in order to humiliate and desecrate everything that they wanted to demolish about the rival religion and nation. So, for example, violating a Hindu woman would be transcribed onto the entire Hindu community. So for example, a violence on a Hindu woman would be transcribed to the entire community at large. It would be like humiliating the Hindu values and the Hindu nation itself, the nation of the Hindus. Conversely, we see the second form of violence is coming from within the women's family. So it constituted of male family members honor killing their female kin or forcing them to commit suicide in order to safeguard familial and ethnic purity from getting contaminated by the rival religion. In this context, Sidhwa's novel focuses on the first form of violence. Here we don't get to see much of honor killing, where the family male members kill their own wives, daughters and sisters. We just see intercommunal violence. Through the characters of Aya and Hamida, the depiction of rape and abduction followed by the rescue and rehabilitation of the survivor, the victimized women, allow one to decode various forms of religion incited patriarchal ideology that were operative during partition era, which effectively which effectively debunk the reality of women's position in a society, the reality of women as individuals. So, the novel begins just months before the partition of India in the city of Lahore, where the prepubescent Lenny is under the charge of her Aya. Aya is shown as a strong woman who exercises autonomy and choice over her life, and she has a kind of influence, a kind of charismatic influence over her multi-ethnic group of suitors. Critic Anna Bernard suggests that the Hindu Aya's multi-confessional group of lovers represents a pre-partition pluralist idyllic society, which is now seen as an irretrievable past in the post-colonial memory of the divided nation. Amongst this secular group, the most prominent suitors of Aya are the Masyur and the Ice Candy Man. The Masyur and the Ice Candy Man are both Muslims, but we see that this becomes a story of love triangle, where against the backdrop of a partition, two Muslim men are vying for Aya's love, and then they actually cross swords, and Ice Candy Man resultantly murders Masyur. So, it's not only the Hindu-Muslim logic that works. Sometimes the personal emotionscape dominates one's thoughts and actions over and above the larger political incidents. So, here we don't see the two Muslim men becoming friends just by virtue of belonging to the same community. They are rivals and competitors who are both competing for Aya's love. So, as the partition massacres become intense, the identity of people gets limited to their religion. They are reduced to their religious ghettos. Lenny describes this transition and shift in perspective when, for the first time as a child, she realizes that her Aya is a Hindu woman. It had never occurred to her which community Aya comes from. So, with the change of events, she starts realizing these things. So, common people were away from the decision of the partition, and yet they had to bear the brunt of the Great Divide. Regarding the protagonists of the freedom struggle, child Lenny expresses her surprise that they actually existed and that they are not mythic figures. So, to quote Lenny, someone we would only hear about and never see. So, this shows the distance between the common people and the leaders who sometimes were only part of the glorified narratives, the glorified, history, about India's freedom struggle, and they could not be identifiable. The common people's lives never intersected with that of the freedom fighters, the heroes. They were up on an elevated pedestal and quite distant from the ongoings of the common people's lives, the reality in the common people's lives. So they were quite distant from the experiences that the common people were undergoing. So as the narrative proceeds, Aya begins to lose her autonomy and her, in a way, her choice, her freedom as the social environment gets charged with increasing communal animosity and hostility. In this regard, critic Niloufar Bharucha comments, I quote Bharucha, "The secular landscape of Lahore is fragmented into religious enclaves," unquote. As Gilles Didur notes when the novel opens, I quote Didur, Aya Oshanta is able to deflect patriarchal expectations of monogamy and conjugality, while after partition her actions are constrained and her agency and body are governed by patriarchal struggles over land and identity, unquote. Moreover, in terms of the physical setting, the secular group that previously gathered at Queen's Park beneath the statue of Queen Victoria, which symbolized the united religions under British rule, now moves to the Wrestlers Restaurant. It's very symbolic where they start meeting. Previously, they used to meet at the Queen's Park just beneath the Queen's statue, and they were together. Now they are moving to a place called the Wrestlers Restaurant, and they start wrestling. They are verbally wrestling. They are, there is a tiff among all these members of the group, among all these friends. So this shift from the park to the Wrestlers Restaurant dislocates Aya from, occupying the central position of that friend circle. She is no longer the center of that circle, and the circle is no longer in harmony. Everyone is at each other's throats. The confusion regarding the new boundaries loom over the common people, and there are debates, uncertainty, especially because all these people are grassroots people, they are workers, they are, commoners, they are at the margins of the society, so they are constantly surmising about the future of their country. Where would they go? Their own future. So the fate of the commoners is supposed to be decided by a handful of elite leaders. The helplessness of the commoners regarding the new boundaries becomes evident in an argument of the locals where the massier is saying that if Punjab is divided, Lahore is bound to go to Pakistan. There is a Muslim majority here. To which the gardener in turn replies that Lahore will stay in India. Now, another friend, the butcher, says that since there is too much Hindu money here, they own most of the property and business in the city. So, since the Hindus own most of the property and business, very likely Lahore will become part of India. And so all these conjectures, all these guessings and consequent altercations can be seen. So, one part from the novel, Lenny observes, one day everyone is themselves and the next day they are Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, Christian. People shrink, dwindling into symbols. Aya is no longer just my all-encompassing Aya. She is also a token, a Hindu. Carried away by a renewed devotional fervor, she expends a small fortune on joss sticks, flowers and sweets on the gods and goddesses in the temples, unquote. Hence, Lenny's words indicate that the narrowing and shoring up of community identity diminishes the vitality and the complexity of social relations in a given community. So, Aya and the others reconfigured their self-presentation when they sense that their interests are in danger of being marginalized, that they will become a minority in a newly born nation. Or conversely, their sense of self is elevated to a privileged position when they sense that they would become, their community rather would become, part of the majority population. So, if Lahore happens to belong to Pakistan and an individual is a Muslim, the person feels more comfortable because he is part of the majority population. So there is a shifting dynamics. We see that there is a shifting relations of power pervading the country during and after the partition. Parsis, we see in this context, are reduced to irrelevant nomenclatures. They are a minor community, a very small section of people. So they are become irrelevant nomenclatures between the Muslims and the Hindus that are mobilized by nationalist rhetoric. Both the Muslims and the Hindus take up very strong positions, and the Parsis are almost invisible in this order. This leads Leni to confront the most fundamental question: what is God? What is religion after all? So, regarding cracking India, Jallidur comments, prior to the escalation of partition tensions, Aya is able to negotiate the unequal relations of power with the men in her community around issues such as expression of her sexual identity or sexual agency and her desire for community affiliation. However, after partition, she is more constrained, and eventually her body is turned into a fulcrum for power struggles among men. As Veena Das argues in relation to the treatment of women during partition violence, the woman's body, to quote Das, the woman's body became a sign through which men communicated with each other. So the woman's body becomes an essential sign through which men communicated with each other, unquote. So Arunima, they suggests that cracking India demonstrates the need to re-examine narratives about women during the partition. Aya's abduction and bodily violation are results of personal jealousy and vehemence of her rejected lover, who turns into an opportunist and uses this ethnic clash of partition, who is using the larger scenario, the larger communal turmoils that's going on to justify his vindictive actions as a valiant performance of his masculinity. So, Ice Candy Man is actually taking advantage of the disturbed times, the communal tension between the Hindus and the Muslims, and he is making use of his own community fellow men. She is making use of a number of Muslims, a gang of Muslims, to abduct and rape Aya, and that becomes a show, an exhibition of his masculinity at that point in time, right? It is seen as a kind of a valiant performance, his triumph as a Muslim and as a male, and also as a defeated lover. Furthermore, through Hamida's character, Sidhwa reveals that despite the state's paternalistic efforts to recover and rehabilitate abducted and raped women, these violated women became a reminder of the nation's shame and failure in being able to protect them amply, and such incidents occurring in women's lives led to the social death of the victimized gendered subject. Such such victims and survivors, even after being recovered, would never get back to their normal life, would never be able to get back to normalcy. So Leni's innocence is misused by the Ice Candy Man when he extracts information about where Aya is, and then he deceives Leni. He makes use of the information that he gets from the child, and then he uses that information to abduct Aya. Leni realizes that her trust has been broken by her very good friend, Ice Candy Man. So Leni told Ice Candy Man about Aya's whereabouts because she thought he's a very good friend. He's her hero and he would never fail her. He would never do anything disappointing or anything that could hurt her. However, Leni's trust is broken, and this leads to a scarring experience for Leni, and as a part as a result of this entire incident that Leni witnesses, a part of her innocence is lost forever. A part of her innocence is lost forever. Many years later, when Leni is writing this story about Aya, about looking back at partition as an adult, this entire story has underlying tone of guilt because she had betrayed Aya. That sense of betraying her ayah never leaves Lenny even as an adult. So, in essence, we see that novel Cracking India allows for exposing the patriarchal nationalist agenda that dominated at the time of partition, that and which used women's bodies as vehicles, as means for inscribing power relations between two rival ethnic groups, and consequently erasing the gravity of the embodied violence that was enacted on the female body. So, we see that when we talk about the formal history or historiography of partition, these incidents of embodied violence on female body have been very strategically erased and expunged. We talk about positive things about freedom struggle, but hardly there is a discussion on what women underwent. Much later in partition scholarship, we find these feminist interventions happening, and the narratives of women, the narratives of women are told by women themselves, and so a new dimension, a new direction of the past is thereby revealed, and we come to face a different side of the history altogether. So, with this, I come to the end of today's lecture. Let's meet with a new topic in our next lecture. Thank you.